Jake had always been a man of integrity. He prided himself on doing his job well, following the rules and never letting personal feelings get in the way of his duties. But when he met Sarah, a gorgeous inmate who was known for her ability to manipulate those around her, he found himself questioning his own boundaries. What started as a simple favor turned into a series of events that he would regret for the rest of his life. The consequences of his actions weren't immediate, but when they came crashing down, they shattered everything he thought he knew about loyalty, integrity, and the price of temptation. Jake had always considered himself a man of ironclad principles. He'd been a prison guard for over a decade, working in the same facility with the same routines. He understood the importance of maintaining strict boundaries between himself and the inmates, and his reputation as a no-nonsense officer made him both respected and feared. He had a simple philosophy: keep your distance, follow the rules, and don't let anything distract you from your duty. He'd built his life on that foundation, married to Karen, a woman he adored, and living in a quiet suburban neighborhood that felt like a safe haven from the chaos of his work. But Sarah was different. He first noticed her about 3 months ago. Sarah wasn't a particularly violent inmate, but she had a reputation for being something of a provocateur, tall, with long, dark hair, and those striking blue eyes that seemed to pierce right through you. She was the kind of woman who could command attention with just a glance. She was in her mid-20s and stood out in a facility where most of the inmates were older and more hardened by their circumstances. Sarah had an air of vulnerability about her, something that was probably just as calculated as the way she dressed, often in a manner that emphasized her curves. She wore her clothing in a way that caught your eye without overtly flaunting it. Her presence wasn't loud or brash. It was subtle but effective. And it worked. Sarah knew exactly how to make people, especially men, look twice. Jake wasn't immune to the way she carried herself, but he kept his focus. He had seen plenty of attractive inmates come through the system, and he'd never allowed himself to be distracted by their appearance. After all, he was married to Karen, and she was everything to him. His loyalty was unshakable. So when Sarah first approached him, he hadn't expected much. She had come to him asking about something simple: her paperwork. Nothing unusual, right? She was inquiring about the forms she needed to fill out to request a transfer to a different section of the prison, one that was quieter and, in her words, safer. She claimed that she couldn't sleep at night because of the noise from the nearby cells. At first, Jake thought nothing of it, another inmate with a simple complaint, but there was something in her eyes when she spoke to him, a pleading quality that made him hesitate. Jake's first instinct was to dismiss her request outright. It wasn't uncommon for inmates to try to manipulate the system, and he wasn't one to fall for it. But Sarah's voice, soft yet insistent, made him pause. There was an underlying sadness in her words, something that made Jake wonder if there was more to her story than he realized. She wasn't trying to make a scene, wasn't throwing a tantrum or demanding special treatment. Instead, she quietly requested help, asking him to fill out a form for her. That was all it took. In the back of his mind, Jake told himself that this was just a simple act of kindness, nothing more. He could handle it. He was the guard in charge, and it wasn't too much trouble to help her out. But he didn't know then that this seemingly innocuous interaction would set off a chain of events that would lead him to question his own morality. A few days later, Sarah approached him again. This time, her demeanor was slightly different. She had a way of looking at him that made his heart skip a beat, a softness in her expression mixed with a hint of something more mischievous. She smiled at him, and Jake couldn't help but return it, though he quickly chastised himself for letting his guard down. He was supposed to be impervious to this kind of behavior, but Sarah had a way of getting under your skin. She made casual conversation at first, asking about his family, about his job, as though they were old friends. She wasn't being flirtatious, not in any overt way, but Jake couldn't help but notice how her eyes lingered on him just a bit too long. It was disarming. And Jake, for all his professional detachment, felt the tug of something inside him. "You know, I'm really grateful for your help," she said softly, her voice dropping just a touch, as though sharing a secret. "You're one of the few guards here who actually listens to us." She said this with such genuine warmth that it almost felt like a compliment, and Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, albeit an irrational one. He had always prided himself on being fair with everyone, even the inmates. He hadn't realized it then, but this small exchange was where things began to shift. Sarah's subtle manipulation wasn't obvious at first, but it was there, woven into her words, into the way she carried herself around him. She wasn't just playing the part of the innocent, misunderstood inmate. She was a woman who knew how to make people bend to her will. And Jake, despite his better judgment, was falling into her trap. It was only after the third interaction that Sarah asked for something more significant. She wanted to move her cell. It wasn't a completely unreasonable request, but it was just the kind of thing that could easily be denied if she wasn't careful. She claimed that she was having trouble sleeping due to the constant noise from the other inmates in her block. Jake, thinking it was a harmless request, didn't hesitate to help. It wasn't like it would cause any harm, and he had the authority to make it happen. The moment Sarah made her request, Jake should have questioned the timing. After all, she had never seemed particularly bothered by the noise before. But that was the thing about Sarah. She was clever. She made it seem like a simple request, something that any reasonable person would grant. He didn't realize at the time that this was just the beginning of a series of manipulative moves on her part. She had planted the seed, and now it was beginning to grow. As the days passed, Jake found himself thinking more and more about Sarah, though he told himself it was only because of his duty to the job, but he knew better. Deep down, he understood that there was more to it. It wasn't just about helping an inmate. It was about a connection, one that made him question his resolve. The first cracks in Jake's armor had already appeared. He just didn't know it yet. The days that followed felt oddly charged. Jake's routine had been disrupted not by any major incident, but by something much more subtle, Sarah's increasing presence in his life. It wasn't just the small favors anymore. She had started to show up in his thoughts during quiet moments when his mind wandered. He caught himself thinking about her more than he should, wondering what her life had been like before prison, imagining the kind of woman she could be outside those cold, sterile walls. He told himself it was nothing. She was just another inmate, just another part of his job. But Sarah didn't make it easy. She had a way of looking at him, of speaking to him, that was hard to resist. Her conversations always felt like more than just pleasantries. They felt intimate, as though she was confiding in him. And it was clear that Jake enjoyed the attention. It wasn't until he found himself helping her again, this time with a personal request, one that didn't fall within the strict boundaries of his duties, that Jake realized how deep he had already fallen. She had asked him to look into something for her, a request that would require him to step outside the usual protocols. He knew it was wrong, he knew it was a slippery slope, but once again, he found himself saying yes, justifying it in his mind as another act of kindness. After all, she was just an inmate. How bad could it be? It was in this moment that Jake's professional detachment finally began to crumble, and, unknowingly, he was stepping into a dangerous game he would soon regret. As the weeks passed, Jake found it increasingly difficult to ignore the growing tension between him and Sarah. What had started as a series of small favors, simple requests that seemed so harmless at the time, began to evolve into something more complicated. The lines between professionalism and personal involvement blurred, and Jake wasn't sure when it had all crossed over. All he knew was that the way he interacted with Sarah had changed. He didn't just feel like a guard anymore. He felt like something else, something personal, something intimate. At first, he tried to brush off the feeling. He was just being kind, he told himself. He was just doing his job, trying to help an inmate who had a legitimate request. He knew the drill. He'd seen it all before. There were countless inmates who had tried to charm their way into getting what they wanted, but Sarah was different. She wasn't overt about it. She didn't beg or make demands. She was quiet, subtle, and that made her all the more dangerous. The more Jake helped her, the more he began to look forward to their encounters. Sarah's smile became his reward. Her laughter a sound he could almost hear when he closed his eyes. The way she would sit across from him, leaning forward slightly as though sharing a secret, made him feel important. She had a way of making him feel like he was the only one who truly understood her, and it was a dangerous illusion. She knew how to play him, how to make him feel like a knight in shining armor, coming to her rescue, but Jake couldn't see it. He was too deep in. One afternoon, Sarah approached him again. This time, her demeanor was different. There was an urgency in her eyes, a tension in her body language that made Jake pause. He had seen her like this before, when she had a request that was more than just paperwork. She wanted something from him, but this time there was an underlying edge to it. She needed more than just a simple favor. "Jake," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need your help with something. Something personal." Jake hesitated for a moment, but before he could speak, she continued. "It's just, I trust you. I know you won't judge me." Her words were loaded with meaning, and Jake felt a strange flutter in his chest. He had heard that tone before, and he knew it all too well. It was the kind of tone that made you feel like you were the only person in the world who could save them. "What do you need?" Jake asked, his voice a little rougher than he intended. He didn't want to give in to whatever it was, but he found himself unable to resist. He was already too far gone. "I need to move to a different block," she said, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of vulnerability and determination. "I can't take it in here anymore. The other inmates, they're making my life hell. You're the only one I can ask." Jake knew this was a dangerous request. He could tell her no, tell her that it wasn't his decision to make. But Sarah had a way of making even the simplest request seem urgent, pressing. She had a way of making him feel responsible for her happiness, for her well-being. And the truth was, Jake didn't want to say no. He wanted to be the one who helped her. He wanted to be the person she turned to, the one who could offer a solution, a way out of the chaos she claimed to be living in. He told himself it was just a small thing, that he could put in the paperwork and move her to a quieter section of the prison. It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't anything that would break the rules. But deep down, Jake knew that it wasn't just about moving her to another block. It was about something more. It was about the growing connection between them, about how each favor made him feel closer to her, how each moment spent talking to her made the lines between them blur even further. Jake knew he should have stepped back, but he couldn't. He couldn't stop himself from becoming involved. He had seen the way Sarah's eyes lit up when he agreed to help her. The relief on her face was enough to make him feel like a hero. But it was more than that. He realized that he enjoyed the feeling of being needed, of being the one she turned to when she was in trouble. There was something intoxicating about it, something that made him feel like he was playing a role in her life that no one else could. And so, he put in the request, told Sarah that it would take a few days, and assured her that he was doing everything he could to make it happen. The whole time, he couldn't help but wonder what was going on in her mind, what she was thinking as she looked at him with those wide, searching eyes. There was a part of him that still clung to the idea that he was just doing his job, just helping an inmate in need. But there was another part of him that knew better. He was crossing a line, and it was a line that he couldn't uncross. Over the next few days, Jake and Sarah continued their interactions, and with each passing moment, Jake felt himself sinking further into a web of his own making. He would stop by her cell to check on the request, to make sure the process was going smoothly, and each time she would thank him with that soft smile of hers, the one that made his heart skip a beat. And each time he would tell himself that it was nothing more than professional courtesy, that he was just doing his job. But the truth was, it had become so much more than that. One day, Sarah sat down beside him during one of their brief encounters. She leaned in just slightly, and for the first time, Jake felt the unmistakable pull of attraction. It wasn't just her looks, though they certainly helped, but it was the way she carried herself, the way she made him feel seen, understood. It was as though she was speaking directly to his soul, tapping into something deep inside him that had been buried for years. "You're the only one who's been kind to me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone else just sees me as a troublemaker. But you see me." Jake's heart raced. The vulnerability in her voice was real, and it struck something deep inside him. It was almost like she was confessing something personal to him, something that he was the only one in the world who could understand. It was dangerous, and Jake knew it, but for some reason he couldn't pull away. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that he was the one who could make things better for her, the one who could help her escape from whatever prison she felt trapped in, physically or emotionally. He reached out, almost unconsciously, and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm here for you," he said softly. "I won't let anyone treat you like that." The moment the words left his mouth, Jake knew it was too late. He had let himself get too close, and there was no going back. His heart pounded as he realized just how far he had fallen into this dangerous game. But Sarah wasn't done. She knew exactly what to say, exactly what to do to keep him hooked. And Jake? He was too far gone to realize that he was the one being played. Days turned into weeks, and Jake's relationship with Sarah continued to evolve in ways he hadn't anticipated. He had crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. He had promised to help her, to make sure she was taken care of, and it seemed like the more he did for her, the more involved he became. His professional demeanor had all but disappeared. What started as small favors and simple gestures of kindness now felt like something deeper, something more personal. He had started to share more of himself with her too. Stories from his past, his frustrations with his marriage, his doubts about his career. Sarah listened, really listened. She didn't judge him, she didn't interrupt, she just absorbed everything he said, nodding occasionally, offering soft words of comfort when he needed them. It was the kind of attention Jake hadn't received in a long time. His wife, Michelle, had become distant. The love between them had dulled over the years. They barely spoke anymore, let alone connected. And here was Sarah, someone who seemed to understand him in ways Michelle never had. Jake found himself looking forward to his shifts more than ever before. He would go to work each day knowing that he would see Sarah, knowing that they would talk, share a few moments of genuine connection. He couldn't help it. Every time he saw her, his chest tightened. His pulse quickened. Sarah had a way of making him feel alive again, like he was someone important, like he mattered. But with each passing day, the guilt gnawed at him. He knew he shouldn't be involved in this way, that he was compromising his oath's integrity and professionalism, but every time he tried to back away, Sarah would say something that would draw him back in. She would tell him how much she appreciated him, how grateful she was for his kindness. It was impossible to resist. She made him feel needed, desired even. She made him feel like a man again, not just a guard or a husband caught in a stale marriage. One evening, after a particularly long shift, Jake sat in his car parked outside the prison gates, staring blankly at the dashboard. His mind was spinning, filled with conflicting thoughts. He knew something had to change. He couldn't keep going on like this. But every time he thought about stepping back, he remembered Sarah's face, her smile, the way her eyes locked with his when they spoke. He couldn't let go. It was during one of these moments of internal conflict that he received a phone call from Michelle. Her voice was distant, cold. "Jake, we need to talk when you get home," she said. Jake's heart sank. The tone of her voice told him everything he needed to know. He had been avoiding the problem in his marriage for far too long, and now it was catching up to him. He wasn't sure what Michelle wanted to say, but he knew it wouldn't be good. He sighed, hung up the phone and started the car. His mind a whirl of emotions. He had been neglecting his marriage, and now it was about to implode. But in the back of his mind, a small, dangerous voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, the cracks in his relationship with Michelle were just the beginning. Maybe this was fate's way of guiding him to something or someone else. When Jake arrived home that evening, Michelle was sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red, her face etched with a kind of weary sadness. She didn't look up as he entered. "We need to talk about us, Jake," she said quietly, her voice shaky. "About everything." Jake sat down across from her, his stomach in knots. He knew what was coming, but hearing the words out loud made it more real, more painful. They had drifted apart over the years. The affection was gone. The connection was gone. He had been trying to bury it with his work, with his escape into the world of Sarah, but now there was no running from the truth. "I know I've been distant," he began, his voice thick with regret. "I haven't been a good husband. I've been focusing on everything but us. But Michelle, you've been focusing on someone else," she interrupted, her voice sharp. "I know about Sarah." Jake's heart skipped a beat. His world seemed to freeze for a moment. He had never intended for Michelle to find out, but the truth always has a way of surfacing, doesn't it? He could see the hurt in her eyes, the betrayal that had replaced the love they once shared. "Michelle, it's not what you think," he started, but she cut him off again. "Don't lie to me, Jake," she said, her voice trembling now. "I see the way you act when you talk about her, the way you talk to her, the way you've been acting distant with me. You think I haven't noticed?" Jake was silent. He didn't have a defense. He couldn't deny what Michelle was saying. He had been distant. He had been lost in his thoughts about Sarah. It wasn't fair to Michelle, but he had been too deep in the pull of something he couldn't explain. "You've been neglecting me, Jake," Michelle continued, her voice breaking. "And I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending like everything's okay when you've clearly checked out." Jake felt the weight of her words sink into his chest. He had been so wrapped up in Sarah, so focused on what was happening at work, that he hadn't seen the damage he was causing at home. The guilt flooded over him, thick and suffocating. "Michelle, I'm sorry. I've messed up. I don't know what's wrong with me," he said, his voice filled with shame. "But I never meant to hurt you." Michelle stood up from the table, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, Jake. You've already made your choice." Jake felt a sense of panic rising within him. He didn't want to lose her. He didn't want to lose everything he had built with her, but the damage had been done. "Please," he whispered, reaching out for her hand. "I'm sorry. I don't want to lose you. I'll fix this." But Michelle didn't respond. She pulled her hand away and walked out of the room, leaving Jake sitting at the kitchen table, drowning in the weight of his actions. The harsh reality of what he had done hit him all at once. He had been careless. He had let his emotions get the best of him, and now he was facing the consequences. As the hours passed, Jake's thoughts turned back to Sarah. He realized that he had been so caught up in what she represented, a chance to escape, to feel desired, that he hadn't considered the consequences of his actions. Sarah had become a distraction, a temporary fix to the emptiness he felt in his life. But now, it had cost him his marriage. And deep down, Jake knew that even though Sarah had made him feel important, she was never going to be the answer to his problems. But that realization came too late. The damage was done, and there was no turning back. Jake sat in silence for what felt like hours. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavy, pressing down on him. Michelle hadn't returned to the kitchen. He could hear the faint sound of her footsteps upstairs, the occasional creak of the floorboards as she moved around, likely packing her things or just trying to compose herself. The weight of his mistakes settled deep in his chest, a gnawing ache that refused to fade. He had messed up, badly. He rubbed his temples, trying to make sense of everything. How had he let it get this far? How had a seemingly harmless act of kindness turned into this disaster? He had convinced himself that Sarah was just someone who needed help, someone who had been thrown into a cruel system and needed a friend. But that wasn't the whole truth, was it? He had wanted to believe it was. But deep down, he knew there was something more. He had let his guard down, had let himself be drawn in by her presence, by the way she made him feel like someone important, someone valued. His phone buzzed against the table, breaking the suffocating silence. His breath hitched in his throat as he saw the name on the screen. Sarah. For a brief moment, he just stared at it, uncertain of what to do. Every instinct told him to ignore it, to finally put an end to whatever this was. But his fingers betrayed him. And before he knew it, he had picked up the call. "Jake?" Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Are you okay?" He exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. "No, Sarah, I'm not okay." There was a pause on the other end. "What happened?" she finally asked. Jake hesitated. Did he tell her? Did he let her know that his marriage was falling apart because of her? Because of them? He wanted to be angry, wanted to blame her for everything. But he knew that wasn't fair. He had made his own choices. No one had forced him to get involved. "My wife knows," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "She knows about us." Silence. Then Sarah sighed. "I'm sorry, Jake," she said. And for the first time, she actually sounded sincere. "I never wanted to cause problems for you." Jake almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Of course, she hadn't wanted to cause problems, at least that's what she would say, but that didn't change the fact that she had. It didn't change the fact that he had allowed himself to be dragged into a situation that was now spiraling out of control. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice raw. She's packing her things. She might leave. Sarah didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but firm. Maybe it's for the best. Jake froze. What? You're not happy, Jake, she said. You've told me that yourself. Your marriage has been falling apart for years. I don't know. Maybe this is the universe's way of pushing you towards something else. Something better. Her words sent a chill down his spine. Something better. Was that what he had been looking for all along? Was that why he had let himself get so close to her? Had he been searching for an escape? For a way out of a life that no longer made him happy? But as he sat there, replaying everything in his mind, he realized something. Sarah wasn't the answer. She never had been. She was an illusion, a temporary distraction from the real problem. His marriage hadn't been ruined by her. It had been crumbling long before she ever entered the picture. I need to fix this, he said suddenly, gripping the phone tighter. I can't just walk away from my wife, from my life. I messed up, but I have to at least try. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed. I understand, she said, though there was a hint of disappointment in her voice. I guess this is goodbye then. Jake swallowed the lump in his throat. Yeah, he said, his voice heavy. I think it is. He ended the call before she could say anything else. For a moment, he just sat there, staring at his phone, feeling the weight of everything sink in. Then, with a deep breath, he stood up and made his way upstairs. Michelle was in the bedroom, her suitcase open on the bed, clothes scattered around her. She looked up when he entered, her expression unreadable. Are you leaving? He asked quietly. She hesitated, then nodded. I don't know if I can do this anymore, Jake. His heart clenched. I don't want to lose you, he said. I know I've messed up. I know I've been selfish and distant, and I let myself get caught up in something I never should have. But I don't want this to be the end. I don't want to throw away everything we've built. Michelle stared at him for a long time, her eyes searching his. Then prove it, she finally said. Show me that I'm not just an afterthought to you. Show me that you actually want to fix this. Jake nodded, determination settling in his chest. He had already made too many mistakes. He wasn't going to make another one. As Michelle turned back to her suitcase, as the weight of the moment settled over him, he realized something. Temptation was easy. Giving in to the things that made you feel good in the moment was easy. But real love, real commitment, that was hard, and he was finally ready to fight for it.